Something extraordinary happened in the middle of the 1990s. Nintendo, a company fiercely proud and somewhat conservative when it comes to its products, took a gamble on a new idea by largely unknown development team Game Freak. The Big N was under the leadership of Hiroshi Yamauchi at the time, a man notoriously harsh on external developers in order to ensure hard work and quality, especially after the video games crash of the 1980s, which he had helped to fix. Regardless, a young man by the name of Satoshi Tajiri and his team won the patronage of Mario designer Shigeru Miyamoto, who would help them launch their creation, Pokémon. Although Nintendo had long been carving its name into the annals of gaming history, with Mario, Zelda and Donkey Kong in the throes of its peak years, this humble little project, debuting in February 1996, would soar past all but one of their classic franchises. Today, Pokémon is the second biggest selling video game series of all time, behind only everyone's favourite mustachioed plumber. Upon the release of the first Game Boy titles, Pokémania hit the world in a major way. While Pokémon still boasts a huge community 25 years later, alongside formidable sales and a vast range of merchandise, today's youngsters are unlikely to truly experience the inescapable phenomenon that followed those initial games in the 1990s, incorporating an anime cartoon, trading cards, comic books, clothing and virtually every other product you could slap a brand name on. Of course, I don't mean to sound like I'm gatekeeping, quite the opposite in fact. In this video, I want to look back at Pokémon on its 25th anniversary, and whether it's a trip down memory lane for veteran fans or an introduction for the uninitiated, I hope you'll come to appreciate how Pokémon changed the gaming world forever. The original Pokémon games that started this craze, Red and Green, were released for the Game Boy in Japan well ahead of ever coming to the West. By the time they did, reaching the US in 1998 and Europe the year after, Green had been changed to blue, with the water-type Blastoise replacing the grass-type Venusaur as the box mascot, alongside Red's fire-type Charizard. It was thought that marketing the games as red and blue in the West might lead to increased sales in the United States, the colours being reminiscent of the American flag. There was a separate blue version in Japan, an enhanced version of red and green that formed the basis of the Western release, but I'll be referring to the collective first generation of games as red and blue in this video for the sake of ease. They take place in the region of Kanto, a land where humans live in harmony alongside a race of creatures known as Pokémon, which are commonly caught by trainers and used to battle each other, allowing them to grow and evolve. You play as a young boy, canonically known as Red, who receives a Pokémon from his neighbour Professor Oak and is sent out on a mission to fill the Pokédex, an encyclopedia of all 151 of the critters. Along the way, he also takes part in the Pokémon League, competing against the region's 8 powerful gym leaders for a shot at becoming the champion, as well as foiling the plans of the nefarious mafia-like Team Rocket, who use Pokémon for evil. Ostensibly it was a game about friendship, teamwork and personal growth, although you could make the argument that it was a game about sending children to a life of vigilantism and bloodsport. But we'll get onto the darker interpretations later. This concept stems from Satoshi Tajiri's childhood, which he spent collecting bugs in the woods. When arcades began to surround his bucolic hiding spots, the idea hit him like a thunderbolt, and he aimed to reconcile his twin loves of nature and video games. Through the medium of gaming, Tajiri would recreate the simpler, serene atmosphere of his youth, creating an idealistic world that would give modern kids an escape from a buzzing digital age on the edge of a new century. By the time of the release of Red and Blue, Nintendo's consoles had played host to some of the most celebrated RPG adventures, including Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger and Earthbound. What was so special about the player's role in this world, however, was the extent to which they could imprint their own personality on their party members. Gameplay was a lot more elastic. You chose your team of 6, and then their nicknames and movesets from the pool of combinations. It wasn't as relatively linear as the role-playing games of old, in which you might get to choose your avatar's moniker and basic weaponry. Here in Kanto, you were in charge. The fantasy world of Pokémon was completely your own. This theme of nature being overtaken by technological progression is evident in Red and Blue's Kanto region. Its fields, forests, mountains and seas sit alongside recurring themes of science and industry. Early in the game you can visit Pewter Museum, which displays ancient fossils as well as real life facts about the moon landing and space travel. You'll also meet Bill, an inventor who's developed a method of storing your living, breathing Pokémon in a digital format on PC. Later you'll come to the towering Saffron City, which dominates the middle of Kanto. It hosts the Silphco building, a company whose technologically advanced products are coveted by Team Rocket, as we discovered during a climactic chapter of the story. Celadon City is known for its shady game corner of slot machines, one of the prizes being the synthetic Pokémon Porygon. Other artificial beings include Grimer and Muck, living embodiments of man-made pollution, while Coughing and Wheezing follow a similar design theme. Sometimes in Kanto, Mother Earth reclaims what's rightfully hers. A foreboding, abandoned power plant lies nestled in the mountains, which I don't think is ever mentioned in-game and is easy to miss, but houses a legendary Pokémon as a reward for intrepid explorers. The lab on the distant Cinnabar Island, meanwhile, performs groundbreaking restorative work on fossils, resurrecting extinct beasts like Aerodactyl. In the past, they conducted much more extreme cloning and gene splicing experiments, as evidenced by the sinister diary entries in the ruined Pokémon Mansion. This alludes to the creation of Mewtwo, and is part of some iconic but somewhat dark lore around Pokémon's early days. Even on the Game Boy's relatively small scale, this all felt like a fleshed out, cohesive world with a believable interplay of science and nature, populated by different societal archetypes with varying attitudes towards their place in the Pokemon world. This idea of human connectedness was perhaps the greatest appeal of the games, and in the days before wireless, it necessitated a set of physical cables. Friends could pit their Pokemon against each other in battle or exchange them in a trade, a practice that's still a staple of the series today. In fact, the Game Boy Link cable was a big catalyst in the very creation of Pokemon. The first time Satoshi Tajiri saw two of the consoles connected like this, he imagined bugs walking between them across the cable. Given that a handful of Pokemon were exclusive to each version, trading was the only way to legitimately live up to the slogan of "Gotta catch 'em all." This has been made a lot easier in the online era via the GTS and fan forums, but it's undoubtedly robbed the practice of some of the magic, excitement and satisfaction that it had during the first generation. Traded monsters carried histories, forever emblazoned with the name of their original trainer, making their way far and wide one pair of connected Game Boys at a time. Swapping these teammates, into which each player had put time and effort, fostered a widespread community, which undoubtedly helped engender a desire for the online global gameplay that we enjoy today across various platforms. Offering personalised collaborative gaming and a sense of friendship, Pokemon was social media before social media. The game's myriad Easter eggs and glitches also help perpetuate conversation and schoolyard bonding. A famous example is the mysterious truck parked by the SS Anne, which was the only one in the game and led to whispers of the elusive Mew hiding underneath, as though living up to its feline appearance. The truck was nothing but a neat little surprise, but Mew played a much more significant role. This 151st monster was programmed into the game at the last minute, almost as an afterthought, and was never planned to be obtainable. It was eventually distributed legitimately via events, but it could also be accessed via cheat cartridges and a glitch discovered several years later. Until then, however, Mew's very existence was a genuine urban myth, and at a time when mythical Pokemon didn't just mean something that would be handed out like Halloween candy via mystery gift, Mew felt like it had actual real-world lore attached to it. Then there was MissingNo, a jumbled mess of pixels that was created to serve as an error handler, but would appear as if it was a wild Pokemon when exploiting the game's mechanics. This anthropomorphised piece of coding's effect on the fertile, suggestible minds of fans was so profound that its alien presence was accepted into the canon, and it subsequently found itself the subject of academic studies. However, this was at a time before the internet was as ubiquitous as it is nowadays, and even the gaming information that was on there wasn't as verifiable or as regulated as it is now. This childlike wonderment and lack of provenance gave way to rumours far more ridiculous than Mew and MissingNo, tales of hidden Pokegods like Mewtwo and Peekablu. The latter generally referred to Marill, who was one of the first Gen 2 Pokemon ever revealed and was initially rumoured to be a secret character in Red and Blue. Topps Trading Cards even erroneously released a licensed piece of merchandise using this fan-made moniker. These rumours of the existence of Pokegods were largely circulated by amateur Web 1.0 sites, the glittery animated GIF backgrounds of which will remain forever burned into the retinas of early players. The excitability of fans expanded the boundaries of these humble monochromatic 8-bit lands into vast realms of feverish legend, far beyond the fabled grass at the side of Pallet Town. This decorative inaccessible vegetation was often the setting for these rumours, but with the aid of a walk through Wall Street, it becomes evident that it doesn't hold any secrets. See? And there's also the matter of creepypasta. Pokemon's sunny charm based around sharing only holds up if you don't buy into the unsettling stories attached to the game in the years since. If there's one thing a fanbase loves, it's fiction and theories, and Pokemon has been subjected to countless amounts of speculation over the years. Grown-up fans like to find grown-up themes in their childhood games, and man do they find them. Among other things, it's been speculated that Red and Blue subtly take place in a post-war setting, that you inadvertently kill your rival's Raticate, and that the infamous Lavender Town music drove Japanese children to suicide. All nonsense, of course, but these spooky interpretations have become something of a pop culture themselves. But with these tales of nostalgic fascination comes a harsh reality. These games don't entirely hold up in the cold light of 2021. Looking back, Red and Blue are clunky anachronisms riddled with broken mechanics and dodgy sprite artwork. Pidgeot was a winged head, Mankey was doing the YMCA, Cloyster opened the wrong way, and just what the hell was up with Moltres? Strangely, the sprites were changed between Red and Green and the Japanese Blue, the latter versions being used for the international release too, but in many cases they actually look a lot better in their original forms. On my recent playthrough, I noticed a lot of elements that have been streamlined over the years that we take for granted nowadays. You need to go into the menu every time you want to use an HM move. The item bag isn't divided into compartments and space feels extremely limited. Attacks seem to miss all the time and their effectiveness feels like a crapshoot due to the odd balance of the standalone special stat. Pokeballs also just straight up miss sometimes, and moves like Wrap don't just do damage for several turns, but also rob the target of the chance to retaliate. I was made immobile in Erica's gym for what felt like half the battle because of a Weepinbell doing this to me. Focus Energy even has the complete opposite effect of its intended use, cutting your critical hit rate instead of raising it. The lack of attacks is very palpable too. Obviously there were far fewer moves in general back then, but I was actually surprised at how hard it was to create decent movesets even for powerful Pokemon like Dragonite, Arcanine and Gengar, who barely learn anything by levelling up. This is made worse by the fact that most TMs are a precious one-use commodity, and that Pokemon couldn't be bred in the first generation. In retrospect, battling can be a bit of a miserable experience. Red and Blue might serve as a sobering history lesson in the eyes of today's younger players who have come to expect the comparative glitz of the DS family and the Switch, but the dated aesthetics and mechanics could easily render them unplayable in the eyes of a new generation. Still, for me at least, Red and Blue largely transcend criticism and stand as some truly iconic games. I found replaying them for probably the first time in decades recently was still a lot of fun, but there are more streamlined options for experience in the first generation. They've been remade twice in the last 25 years, first as the charming Fire Red and Leaf Green, perhaps my favourites in the series. These were released on the Game Boy Advance in 2004, recreating Red and Blue using the Generation 3 engine in which Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald were developed. As well as polishing the graphics and updating the mechanics, these made the original Pokédex available from Gen 3 onwards, since the original Game Boy couldn't be connected to its advanced successor. I'd always recommend these games to anyone trying out the series for the first time. More recently, Kanto was reinvented as Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which took their cues more from Yellow, a third Game Boy installment which itself made Red and Blue more akin to the anime cartoon, most significantly by having a companion Pikachu follow you around on the overworld. The Let's Go titles were divisive and had motion controls that were an absolute binfire, but they were a clever, calculated move to corner Gen 1 nostalgists who had been suckered back into the franchise following the worldwide launch of Pokemon Go in 2016. As a side note, the few weeks after this mobile game launched were so reminiscent of those Halcyon playground days during the Red and Blue era, and something I didn't think I'd ever experience again. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to Red and Blue, however, is that the core concept of the series remains the same 25 years later. Yeah, the most recent titles, Sword and Shield, were rife with design flaws, a practically non-existent story, and an overall air of complacency on Game Freak's part, but the ideals of the monster hunting experience and turn-based battle system still shift units like gangbusters and have evolved into a much more nuanced, mathematical metagame. There are the best part of 900 Pokemon now, and while every generation has its misfires, designers are still coming up with lovable, imaginative, fantastical creatures. This gives me hope that with a clearer, more concise focus and taking a cue from player feedback, Pokemon can find its way again and deliver the sort of sheer joy and wonder that Red and Blue bestowed upon us all those years ago. There's a demographic of 20 and 30 somethings who still get butterfrees in their stomach at the reveal of 100 new cartoon creatures and a new region to explore, whether they care to admit it or not. They'll have felt it 25 years ago when they chose Bulbasaur, Charmander or Squirtle and took their first steps into the tall grass. They'll have felt it this year with the announcement of the sprawling Pokemon Legends Arceus. And if the next 25 years are half as exciting, they'll feel it for a long time to come. For myself and many others, Kanto bears a timeless sense of purity, simplicity and innocence. Its rolling fields, gentle rivers, lively cities and mysterious caves epitomise the starry-eyed desire for adventure that the series is built on. Sure, today Red and Blue look very basic and require some understanding and patience to appreciate, but as part of a larger phenomenon alongside the idyllic world of the anime, the carefree days of trading cards, and the genuine social connectivity around Pokemon at the time, owning these games made you feel like you were part of something bigger than yourself. These minimalistic landscapes hold countless memories for players worldwide. For them, coming back to Kanto always feels like coming home.